What's the longest you've ever avoided a place you're still paying for? Because I just calculated that I spent $847 on a gym membership I used exactly 7 times. That's $121 per workout, which makes it the most expensive way to feel guilty about not exercising in human history. I finally cracked the code on why we sabotage our own fitness goals and discovered a method so simple it doesn't require motivation or willpower. Just understanding how your brain actually builds habits instead of fighting against it. But first, meet Mr. Tuk Tuk, my mail carrier who walks 8 miles daily, stays fitter than people half his age, and never thinks about exercise because movement is just woven into his life, revealing 3 uncomfortable truths. 1. Myth between movement addiction versus gym addiction. 2. The possibility that I'm allergic to traditional exercise. 3. I need to keep searching for the perfect workout that finally sticks because it exists. Picture this. I'm driving 3 blocks out of my way to avoid passing the gym I'm still paying for, while listening to a podcast about motivation, calculating that I've spent more money on gym guilt than actual fitness. This whole fitness disaster started with the best of intentions. It began with a fitness resolution that felt bulletproof. I was going to transform my relationship with exercise once and for all. Not just join a gym, commit to a lifestyle change with the kind of financial stakes that would make quitting impossible. I walked into Ninth Stitch Fitness Club with my credit card and enough determination to power a small city. The salesperson saw me coming like a guided missile of motivation. Annual membership, I declared. I'm serious about this. $847 later, I had a shiny new key fob, access to premium equipment, and the kind of optimism usually reserved for lottery ticket purchases. Famous last words. This time will be different. The first week was glorious. I showed up Monday, Wednesday, Friday like clockwork. Posted gym selfies. Felt smugly superior to fitness quitters. I was going to be one of those people who actually stuck with it. Week 2 got complicated. Work deadlines, weather excuses. Just this once became maybe tomorrow, became definitely next week. By month 2, I was driving 3 blocks out of my way to avoid passing the gym, like it was some kind of fitness crime scene. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. I kept paying, month after month, because cancelling would mean admitting defeat, but paying meant I could still theoretically go back anytime. I'd created the world's most expensive procrastination system.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, I calculated my cost per visit, $121 per workout. I could have just lurked around at home, ordering pizza, get chubby, and still spent less money. The cruel mathematics of gym avoidance had made me the least cost-effective exerciser in human history. I turned fitness into financial self-sabotage and somehow convinced myself this was still better than admitting I wasn't a gym person. I wasn't struggling with exercise. I was struggling with the identity of someone who exercises. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. I had a fitness resume that would impress a gym equipment salesman. I tried running, bought $200 shoes, used them for grocery shopping. I'd attempted home workouts, collected 47 YouTube fitness videos in a playlist I never opened. I'd even signed up for a marathon for motivation. Spoiler, I did not run the marathon. The pattern was always the same. Burst of motivation, enthusiastic planning, initial success, gradual decline, elaborate excuse creation, then complete avoidance, followed by guilt-driven internet searches for new fitness approaches. I'd become a fitness method collector without being fit. My browser history was a museum of abandoned exercise intentions, 30-day challenges, quick morning routines, no equipment workouts, and something called metabolic conditioning that I still don't understand. Most embarrassing, I'd started following fitness influencers for motivation while remaining completely sedentary. I was consuming fitness content like entertainment, getting vicarious satisfaction from other people's workouts while my own muscles atrophied from office chair abuse. My brain had developed exercise avoidance patterns that were more consistent than any workout routine I'd ever attempted. Every fitness related decision became an internal negotiation. I should exercise today, followed immediately by, but it's raining, or it's late, or it's Tuesday, or it's a month ending in the letter Y. I turned physical activity into something so loaded with expectations and guilt that my nervous system treated the gym like a threat to be avoided rather than a place to improve health. During this whole fitness identity crisis, I'd been unknowingly observing a masterclass in effortless movement integration, delivered daily by someone who had never heard of fitness optimization and probably thought functional training meant learning to use new equipment. Meet Mr. Tuk Tuk, my mail carrier, mid 40s, who walks 8 miles every single day through our neighborhood with the kind of steady consistency that makes marathon training look like amateur hour. Mr. Tuk Tuk doesn't work out, he works. And his work happens to involve moving his body for 8 hours straight. One Tuesday, while I was browsing motivation techniques for consistent exercise, I watched Mr. Tuk Tuk navigate his daily route. Obviously, because I was procrastinating my own workout. But he moved with this effortless efficiency that made me curious. What I observed over several days was someone who had accidentally solved the exercise consistency problem without trying to solve it. Mr. Tuk Tuk walked uphill, downhill, in rain, snow, heat, carrying a bag that probably weighed more than my abandoned dumbbells. His legs were stronger than mine, his endurance better, his energy levels consistent throughout the day. But here's what struck me. Mr. Tuk Tuk never looked like he was exercising. He looked like someone doing his job, which happened to require movement. No special clothes, no pre-workout rituals, no motivation speeches or fitness tracking, just integrated daily movement that served a purpose beyond burning calories. He'd accidentally stumbled onto what fitness experts spend entire careers trying to teach, making physical activity so woven into your life that it doesn't feel like something separate you have to motivate yourself to do. Watching Master Tuk Tuk forced me to confront 3 uncomfortable possibilities. I could learn whatever he understood about making movement automatic and integrated. I could accept that I'm allergic to traditional exercise. I could keep searching for the perfect workout routine. That moment with Mr. Tuk Tuk planted a seed. What if the problem wasn't my lack of motivation, but my approach to exercise as something separate from life, instead of integrated into it? I stumbled on 2 books that completely reframed how I understood habits, motivation, and why willpower-based fitness always fails. James Clear, a habits researcher, had been studying why some behaviors stick effortlessly while others require constant force. He discovered that successful habits aren't about motivation, they're about environment design and identity change. Clear explains habit stacking. Instead of trying to create new routines from nothing, attach tiny behaviors to existing strong habits. He also revealed that lasting change happens when you stop trying to exercise and start becoming someone who moves. The identity shift makes behaviors automatic rather than effortful. In Atomic Habits, Clear shows how small, consistent actions compound into major transformations, but only when they're designed to work with your brain's natural patterns instead of against them. But understanding positive habit formation was just the beginning. Charles Duhigg revealed something darker about how habits work. Duhigg, a journalist investigating behavioral science, had studied the habit loop. Cue, routine, reward. But he also discovered how this loop gets weaponized against people. Casinos are predators disguised as entertainment venues. They study vulnerable people, retirees with savings, workers with disposable income, then systematically destroy their financial lives using habit science. New visitors get carefully calculated wins to trigger dopamine, then free drinks and room upgrades and players' club benefits as cues to return. It's not gambling, it's psychological manipulation designed to create addicts. These places employ teams of behavioral scientists whose entire job is turning occasional visitors into compulsive gamblers. They're using the same neurological pathways that Duhigg teaches for positive change, but weaponizing them to trap people in cycles that devastate families and ruin lives. In The Power of Habit, Duhigg shows how understanding these loops can either liberate you from bad patterns or, if you're not careful, make you vulnerable to systems designed to exploit your brain's automation tendencies. This revelation hit me. I'd been trying to force create exercise habits using willpower while surrounded by environments designed to make movement difficult and sedentary behaviors effortless. I was fighting sophisticated systems with amateur techniques, so I stopped trying to add exercise to my life and started integrating movement into the life I already live. Armed with this understanding, I decided to use Clear's method, but I needed to start smaller than small. I needed to start with just the identity of someone who washes their gym clothes. My first goal wasn't working out, it was just putting wear and tear on my gym clothes. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening after work, I would change into my workout gear and shoes and wear them for 3 hours. Even if I didn't go anywhere, just put on the clothes and live in them for a while. This felt ridiculous but manageable. No performance pressure, no sweat required. Just the basic act of dressing like someone who exercises for extended periods. After a week of this, I realized my neighbor Harold might be losing his mind. Always dressed for the gym but never leaving the house. So, to retain his sense of sanity, I upgraded to step 2. I'd put on the clothes, drive to Ninth Stitch Fitness Club, tap in with my key fob, fill up my water bottle from their fountain, then leave. Sometimes, I'd hit the McDonald's drive-thru afterward. Double cheeseburger after fake gym visits felt less guilty somehow. The goal wasn't fitness. It was making the gym part of my routine, even if it was a completely unproductive part. I was just practicing being someone whose life included gym visits, however pointless they were. But something unexpected started happening. Some days, after filling my water bottle, I'd think, well, I'm already here. Maybe I'll walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes. Then, occasionally, I'd pick up some light weights, nothing intense, nothing that required changing my low expectations. The breakthrough wasn't dramatic. It was gradual and almost accidental. People at the gym started recognizing me, nodding hello as I came and went. I started knowing which machines were usually free at 6 p.m., which parking spots were closest to the door. 3 months in, I realized I'd been consistently visiting the gym for actual workouts without noticing when the transition happened. My body was changing. I was sleeping better. I started paying attention to what I ate because putting junk food into a body that was getting stronger felt wasteful. Duhigg calls this a keystone habit, one behavior that triggers positive changes in other areas without conscious effort. We'll cover this more in another episode, but essentially the gym habit became the domino that knocked over nutrition awareness, sleep quality, and energy levels. Before I realized it, I had become someone who exercises regularly. Not through motivation or willpower, but through tiny, consistent identity shifts that accumulated into genuine transformation. The real breakthrough isn't finding the perfect workout routine. It's understanding that sustainable fitness comes from becoming someone who exercises rather than someone trying to exercise. Core mindset shifts. Identity beats motivation. Clear's research shows that the identity of I am someone who washes their gym clothes is more powerful than the motivation of I want to work out. Small, consistent actions shape identity more than dramatic fitness resolutions. Habits beat goals. Duhigg's habit loop research reveals that systems create lasting change, not outcome targets. Focus on the process of showing up rather than performance metrics. Environment design beats willpower. Make it easier to exercise than not to exercise. Remove barriers to gym visits and add friction to sedentary alternatives. The identity first fitness method. Phase 1, Identity Building, Week 1 and Week 2. Put on workout clothes 3 times per week after work for 3 hours. No gym visits required. Just practice being someone who dresses for exercise. Phase 2, Location Habit, Week 3 through Week 4. Drive to gym, check in, fill water bottle, leave. Goal? Make gym visits routine regardless of actual exercise. Phase 3, Minimal Movement, Week 5 through Week 8. Add 5 to 10 minutes of light activity when you feel like it. No pressure, just occasional movement while you're already there. Phase 4, Natural Progression, Week 9 onwards. Let intensity increase organically as identity solidifies. Trust that someone who goes to the gym will eventually work out. The key: start so small that your current self can succeed, then let your identity catch up to your actions. About those 3 uncomfortable possibilities, I learned to integrate movement naturally, consistently enough that fitness became automatic rather than effortful. But watching Mr. Tuk Tuk more closely, I realized something else was happening. One morning, I noticed Mrs. Chen from down the street joining Mr. Tuk Tuk's route for about 6 blocks. They walked together, chatted, then Mrs. Chen peeled off toward her own errands. This had been happening regularly, but I'd never paid attention. Eventually, I asked Mr. Tuk Tuk during one of his deliveries, "Does Mrs. Chen walk with you sometimes?" He smiled, adjusting his mailbag. "She doesn't do the whole route, but she knows I pass her house every day at 9:30, and she's been trying to get more movement since her doctor visit. So, she joins me for the uphill part, says it keeps her accountable. I get company, she gets her walk. Works out for both of us." That revelation hit me deeper than any fitness motivation speech ever could. Here was Mr. Tuk Tuk quietly providing structure for someone else's movement goals without trying to be a trainer or coach. He wasn't optimizing anyone's fitness journey or creating workout plans. He was just consistently showing up, and that consistency created space for someone else to build their own movement habit. Maybe sustainable fitness isn't just about integrating movement into your own life. Maybe it's about finding community where movement becomes natural social interaction instead of solitary struggle against your own resistance. Mr. Tuk Tuk wasn't just walking efficiently. He was part of a neighborhood ecosystem where movement happened naturally because people supported each other's daily rhythms. Sometimes, the systems that sustain us aren't just personal habit design. They're relationships with people who make healthy behaviors feel normal and social rather than special and difficult. Maybe real fitness isn't about optimizing your body. It's about finding your place in communities where movement is just part of how people naturally spend time together. If this helped you stop fighting exercise and start building fitness habits that stick, hit subscribe. Next, we're talking about how to build bad habits on other people with specific step-by-step guidance and the surprisingly simple science of designing bad habits that actually sticks.